this is Michel Leviathan Sorbet, and this is a new episode of Wojennik TV. Today a review of a game which is, without any doubt, one of the most important war games published in 2019. It is a game which attracted the attention not only of wargamers, but of gamers in general, so this is quite an exception when it comes to wargames. This title is Undaunted Normandy. This game was published by Osprey Games, and it is already published also in Poland in a Polish edition by Ogry Games. The designers of this game are Trevor Benjamin and David Thompson. The game is for 2 players. One of them will take control of a German squad and the second one of an American squad, facing each other in Normandy 1944. This game was nominated and won the Golden Geek Best Wargame Award in 2019. It was also nominated in the prestigious Charles S. Roberts Awards for the best wargame published in last year. Did it won? Well, at the moment when I'm preparing this video, I still don't know because we are waiting for the voting results. The game will last for about 45-60 minutes. We have several scenarios and the possibility to link them into a campaign. The minimum age of the player will be 14 or higher, but it is absolutely possible to play it with a 10-year-old or even 12-year-old child. Today I'd like to show you this game. I'd like to briefly explain how it works, and at the end I'd like to give you my final recommendation and tell you a few words why I believe this game is such an interesting design. So let's begin. This is Undaunted Normandy, prepared to play a game. First of all, I would like to show you the components of this game and then briefly describe how the game works. So, at first, let's take a look at the components. You will be taking control of a platoon, and in this platoon you will be leading soldiers. Those soldiers will be in different squads, in squad A, B or C. And your assets that you will be using during the game will be of 2 different kinds. The first asset will be the cards. The cards will constitute your platoon, and those cards will be either in your deck or in your hand or in the reserve. Each scenario describes which cards should be added to your reserve and to your deck before the game starts. And those cards represent different soldiers which are part of your platoon. To each such a card is also associated a counter, which will be placed on the board and which will be used in order to track movement and combat of the corresponding unit. Those assets will be used during gameplay from the game's start. Both opponents can have different forces, and in some scenarios some different units will be on both sides. So it all depends on the scenario. In the scenario book we receive 12 different scenarios, and as you can see, each of them describes how to prepare the board, so which tiles and how to place them to prepare the battlefield, and also what cards, what number of them you should take and prepare both your deck and also your reserve. Now, let's take a look at a card. This card has different information on it. First of all, it has the name of the unit. It has also the squad to which this unit is associated. It has also a list of the actions that it can take when activated. Finally, you have also an initiative number, which will be used during the initiative phase to bid for initiative. The last information is the name and the surname of the soldiers. So this is a nice addition which I like in Undaunted Normandy, because while leading your platoon, you will not be leading anonymous soldiers. Each of them will have their own name and first name. Now, those assets, those cards, correspond to counters, as I said, and those counters, as you can see, will be used in order to move your units, in order to launch attacks, and in order to track their state. Each such a counter will have a corresponding name and also a letter which will tell us if this is a unit from squad A, B or C. It has also a defense factor which will be taken into consideration when resolving combat. Those tokens are double-sided because units can get suppressed. If they do, they are flipped over, which means that they are currently suppressed, and you will have to use a card corresponding to such a unit in order to flip it once again to their active state. We also put some additional markers before the game starts on the board because we will be adding, for instance, victory points or objective markers which will indicate which tiles should be taken by both sides or by one of those sides if the scenario says so, in order to get victory points. Now the objectives in different scenarios can be very different because you can have scenarios in which your objective will be, for instance, to score 3, 4 or even 1 victory point by taking control of such objectives. But sometimes your sole goal will be to pin your opponent. Now, pinning your opponent is done when you manage to remove from the battlefield each rifleman unit that your opponent has. Because rifleman units are the only units in the game which can take control of tiles. This is the only unit which has the control action on the corresponding card, which enables to place a control marker on such a space. Those markers are double-sided because on the second side you'll find the binoculars, which will be used in order to track spaces on which you can move because they were previously scouted. You cannot move to empty spaces. First of all, you have to center your scout in order to place a scouted marker. As soon as you do, you can also move to such a space with other units. And when using riflemen, if placed on such a space, you can also take control of such a space. If this is a space with an objective marker, you instantly get also a corresponding number of victory points. Now, after preparing the board, after placing all the markers, after preparing your deck, you are ready to play. Each scenario will tell you who will be the player with initiative on the first turn, but then you'll start to bid for initiative. The game is played in a series of rounds during which you will be doing 3 things. At first, you'll be drawing cards, and at the beginning of each turn, you will draw exactly 4 cards from your deck. If you have less than 4 cards remaining, you should draw what you have, then reshuffle your discard pile, create a new deck, and draw the corresponding number of cards. On those cards, you'll find both units and also officers which do not have any markers on the board, but they will be very useful because they will grant you additional capabilities, enabling you to add new cards to your deck or to draw cards from your deck. Because Undaunted Normandy will be and is a deck building game. You start the game with a deck, but then you have also a possibility to add new cards to it or even to remove certain cards. During the game, you will be using your units in order to get rid of the fog of war cards, which I will be showing you in a few moments, and also to add new cards. So those officers, for instance squad leaders, will enable you using the bolster action to add new cards to your deck. If this is a squad leader A, you can choose only from A squad cards, which you will add to your discard pile. As soon as you reshuffle, you'll also gain access to those cards. If you choose squad leader B, you'll be choosing from B cards. But if you choose the platoon sergeant, who is your most precious card, which also has the highest initiative value, you can take 3 cards both from the A section or B section or C section if you play a scenario with all the 3 sections, and you can add them to your discard pile. Now, during the initiative phase, you will choose one of those cards in order to bid for initiative. And when both players choose this card, they show this card and we compare the initiative value of the chosen cards. The player who has played the card with the highest value will get initiative for the current turn. If both players decided to play the same card, initiative stays the same as it was during the previous turn. I have already said that in the game you will get also fog of war cards, because I said earlier that each of those cards represents assets from your unit, but not only. You'll get also a certain number of fog of war cards, both in your deck and in your reserve. Now, as you can see, those cards are pretty useless because you have absolutely no actions associated to them and only a value of 1. So this card will be used only to bid for initiative. Apart from that, it will only take place in your deck and it will sometimes take place in your hand. So you will be sometimes drawing bad cards, for instance 2 or 3 fog of wars, which will mean that you won't be able to play an active turn. After the initiative phase, after determining initiative, it's time to resolve your actions. After the initiative phase, each player has only 3 cards left in his hand, and now he can use those cards in any order he wishes. He can do things with each card. First of all, he can decide to hunker down this card, which means that he place it back into his reserve. Now, why would you want to do it? Well, because sometimes you'll find it useful to decrease the number of cards in your deck and to more easily get access to the most precious cards which you want to activate more often than you did before. So this is also a way to reduce the number of cards in your deck, but you cannot get rid of fog of war cards in such a way. The second option is to play your card to use the actions, one of the actions described on your card. And those actions are of different types. You can use move actions in order to move your counters. You can also choose scout actions, which as I said earlier, enables you to move your scout and to place those binoculars counter on additional tiles. Each time you do, you place this marker, but you also add a fog of war card to your discard pile, so you will increase the number of cards, and what is more important, you will increase the number of bad cards in your deck by doing so. But at the same time, placing this binoculars marker enables you to move, then when using another unit, use the move action in order to move the unit to such a space. As long as there isn't such a marker on a space, you cannot move other units than scouts on such spaces. Other actions include, for instance, reckon on or conceal on scout cards. Conceal enables you to give a fog of war card to your opponent, so you can increase the number of bad cards in his deck by doing so. You can also use the recon action, which is a way to get rid of fog of war cards. If you have a fog of war card and a scout in your hand, you can play the scout for your recon action and remove the fog of war card entirely from the game. Then you can draw a new card, so this is a very powerful action. You get also different kinds of attacks. You get standard attacks, you get suppress attacks, blast attacks. Attacks work in a very simplified way because when launching an attack, you check the number of dice that you will be rolling to resolve the attack. Then you calculate the enemy's defense. You check its basic defense. You check the additional defense from the tile on which this marker is located, and you add the distance without counting the starting tile. So if I were to shoot to Rifleman A from this space with my Rifleman A squad, I would have to roll 4 plus 3, 7, a 10 to score a hit. What is also important is even if even if the number to hit is superior to 10, for instance 11, 12, 13, it becomes a 10. So you always can score a hit if rolling a 10. I rolled a 7, it's a miss. But you can reduce the number to hit by, for instance, reducing the distance to your opponent. Or if your opponent decides to move from a place which has a high cover value to a place where it has a lesser cover value, it will be much more easy to kill it. Each time you score a hit, you inflict damage to such a unit. When inflicting damage to a unit, the opponent has to check if it has any cards associated to this unit in his hand. If he has to discard one of those cards. It has to remove them entirely from the game. If your opponent doesn't have any such cards in his hand, he has to check his discard pile and remove one of those cards from the game. If he doesn't have any card in his discard pile, he has to take his deck and search for such a card and remove it from the game. If he doesn't have any such a card, neither in his hand or in his discard pile or in his deck, he will remove his counter instead, which means that such a unit became pinned. Pinning your enemy sometimes is key to victory and sometimes is also an objective of one of the sides during gameplay. If both sides become pinned, because it can happen, we verify who controls the biggest number of objectives, and this is the winner. If both sides control the same amount of objectives, it's the player who has the initiative counter who wins. So no draws. There is also this ultimate tiebreaker. Now different units work in a different way because they have a different palette of actions. We have different kinds of attacks. We can use suppressing attacks in order to flip your enemy. It doesn't inflict damage, but it blocks your enemy in such a way that he has to spend cards in order to flip them instead of using standard actions. You can use your platoon sergeant or you can use your squad leaders in order to play cards multiple times during your activations. You have a full palette of different actions to take. After playing your free cards, if you have any cards left, for instance a fog of war, you discard everything that you had and your opponent plays his or her turn. After doing so, the turn ends and we restart a turn by drawing 4 cards, by bidding for initiative and by making new actions. We play until the moment one side accomplishes its objectives, which are implied by the scenario. We do not play an entire round because at the moment a side achieves victory, it accomplishes the conditions of winning which are described in the scenario. It just wins. We do not end the round to give the opponent an opportunity to make a counter attack. Now one important thing is also how to take control of objectives. I said already that only rifleman units can take control of objectives, but in order to do so you also have to get rid of enemy counters on such spaces, because if there is an enemy unit on a space, you cannot take control of such a space. You have to get rid of such a unit in order to take control of the tile. If your opponent already had a control marker on such a space, when using your control actions, you'll flip it, and for your next activation, for your next control action, you'll be able to take control of such a tile. That's pretty it when it comes to the basic elements and the basic rules of Undaunted Normandy. Now I would like to pass to my final thoughts. I would like to tell you what I think about this game, what I think are its strong but also a little bit weaker points. Undaunted Normandy is a game exceptional in its kind because it is supposed to be a war game. But at the same time, it is a game which attracted the attention of many non-war gamers. I was stunned to see this game presented, reviewed on several channels which never concentrated on war games. This proves that this game has something, that this game is unique in its genre. And when searching for strong points of this game, it is absolutely crucial to underline that this should be the thing that should be the strongest point of this game, the fact that it is a design which attracts the attention of not only wargamers but of gamers in general. So this is an universal design, a thing somewhere between wargames and classical board games, and this is the reason why this game is so extremely popular. This is due to the fact that the game is set in Normandy 1944. It is supposed to be a war game. It is supposed to enable us to recreate tactical fights between German and American troops. But in reality, due to the dose of simplifications used in this game, this will be a deck building game which very loosely has this war game setting. Many Euro gamers do not want to play war games because they find them long, boring, and very hard to learn. Undaunted Normandy is quick to learn and quick to play. It is not very hard to master when it comes to the rules, not to the gameplay, and it is not boring at all because it is very dynamic, it is very interesting. So this game on paper has everything in order to attract potential players. And not only on paper, because this game is very highly ranked, and I will not be surprised if this game reaches even the top 20 or 30 on BoardGameGeek. Now, looking at the strong points of this game, the first one, let's repeat this once more, its universal aspect. It will suit many players. It will suit not only wargamers but also players who tend to play other kinds of board games. It is a game very easy to learn, very easy to teach, very quick to play, very dynamic. At the same time, a game in which you'll have tons of decisions to make. The turns will be extremely quick. You'll just draw cards, you'll play them, you'll move your troops, you'll fire your turn. It will last sometimes 20 seconds or so. So there will be no time to scratch your head for a long time waiting for your opponent to end his turn. You'll see that the situation on the board changes very quickly. You'll have to take sometimes very radical decisions. You'll have to make some sacrifices. You'll have to focus on certain parts of the board. You'll have to change your plans. The thing is, you should always have a plan and plan ahead. But it will not always be possible to accomplish this plan. You'll have to, in accordance to what your opponent does, change your plan and make the best of the cards that you draw. Secondly, the game is extremely functional because, as I said earlier, it is simplified. It is a war game which has left apart many elements which are present in other war games. One example will be, for instance, the terrain feature. You have terrain tiles, but they represent different terrain features. You have some crops, you have some open fields, you have some buildings, but the only difference between them is this small shield printed on the tile, which tells you what will be the additional cover bonus. Brilliant. That's very simple, that's very elegant. If we use the classical wargaming approach, adding an additional terrain feature chart saying you that moving into a crop field costs you 1 point of movement more, that at the same time it hinders line of sight, it doesn't block it, it hinders it. You receive an additional modifier if shot by rifle, but not if shot by mortars. That would be overly complicated. That would be something that would not suit Eurogamers. That would be I think too complicated for some players in order to fully enjoy the game. So I'm glad that Trevor Benjamin and David Thompson decided to simplify this game because it is not a game which is supposed to recreate in a very detailed way how tactical fights looked like in Normandy in 1944. It is rather a game which is supposed to give you fun, which is supposed to give you this feeling of intensity felt on the battlefield. And from this point of view, this game is really what it should be, because it doesn't pretend to be something else. What I really like in the game is the deck building aspect, because it is a deck building game in which you will have to carefully decide what troops to add to your deck, which of them sometimes hunker down, so which to place again onto the deck piles. You'll have to decide what squads to invest in accordance to the situation on the board. And this is pretty tricky because you'll have to find a certain balance between adding cards and at the same time maintaining an efficient deck. Adding more cards gives you more resources, gives you more assets, but at the same time it dilutes the power of other cards, so it makes them less probable of appearing in your hand when playing your turn. Additional fog of war cards, which are an extremely interesting addition, all additionally increase the probability of receiving some crap hands. But even with bad hands, you still be able to do something. So if I were to judge Undaunted Normandy, I'd say that this is an excellent game that can be used to attract additional players and to show them the world of wargaming. Now let me tell you a few words about it, because this is an interesting part in my opinion. Wargames are somewhat next to classical board games, or yes, they are somewhere apart. This is a type of board game, but a very special kind of board game, because wargamers are people who like to recreate certain historical events on game boards, which sometimes like very complex games using big hexagonal maps with tons of counters. I'm one of those guys. But at the same time, this wargame world is very hermetic. New people are sometimes scared by the complexity of wargames, are sometimes scared by the fact that wargames are portrayed as big monster games using tons of elements, very complicated, boring, because they recreate some things which are abstract to classical board gamers who are searching for fun in games and not for simulating conflicts fought 3 centuries ago. So we wargamers sometimes have the problem what game to choose in order to show this wargaming world to non-wargamers. What game to choose to initiate somebody, to show him that wargames are not only very complex games, that there are dozens of interesting wargames, light wargames, which can be played in an hour or so, and which can be something of an impulse in order to discover this world and to search deeper. And Undaunted Normandy is, in my opinion, one of the best games published in the recent years in this aspect. It is such a light war game that it will be extremely interesting also for non-wargamers who can play this game and who can say later, I played a war game. This was not boring, this was interesting. And maybe some of them, when playing this game, will think, well, wargames are not that terrible. There are some interesting wargames, maybe I'll try them. And having played Undaunted Normandy, I'm certain that many players will have this feeling. That's great, because this is what we need in our wargaming society. We need new players, we need players who come with fresh minds, who want to discover this game. We cannot play war games only enclosed in our hermetic society. We still need new players. This is such an interesting hobby that it should always have new players coming in. And Undaunted Normandy is one of those games that I will be certainly and surely using when showing wargames to non-wargamers. This is a game which can create a certain type of bridge between wargamers and non-wargamers, and maybe be an invitation for some of those non-wargamers to cross this bridge in order to further experience or further search for new experiences in this wargaming sector. Maybe this is a nice possibility. Now, after mentioning those strong points, I'd like also to tell you what I think are the weaker points of Undaunted Normandy, because this is a brilliant game, but not a perfect game, a game which still has some flaws. The first one, I'd say, is the fact that I have already said a lot about the potential of this game to be played by non-wargamers. But what about wargamers? Those hardcore wargamers who are searching for Chrome in wargames. Well, Undaunted Normandy will not bring you a lot of this Chrome, especially in this first edition, because Undaunted North Africa is a different pair of shoes. In Undaunted Normandy, you'll have totally symmetrical armies. And you cannot say that German squads, American squads were totally the same during this period, or even in other periods. You cannot say that their morale, that their firepower, that their doctrines were the same. They were different. Formations. And the fact that both decks are totally similar is very abstract, maybe too abstract for some heavy wargamers. The same concerns other aspects. I have already said that there are dozens of simplifications in this game. Maybe some of them will be too much for hardcore wargamers who find this game too easy or too simplified to call it even a wargame. Additionally, in Undaunted Normandy, we have only infantry, we have no vehicles. They appear in Undaunted North Africa, so this system is further enhanced. It will be enhanced, and people who are looking for some more complexity can grab Undaunted North Africa. But Undaunted Normandy is a perfect start, and I believe that this is the best thing that you can choose when trying to play this game, especially if you're not keen on wargaming. Concluding, Undaunted Normandy is, in my opinion, an exceptional design, a game which can attract additional players to wargaming, a game which is very easy to learn, very easy to teach, at the same time very quick to play, extremely dynamic with interesting mechanics, with interesting game flow. It is one of the best games, not only wargames, games published during the recent years. This was the review of Undaunted Normandy, published by Osprey Games and in Poland by Ogry Games. Thank you a lot for watching this video. I invite you to take a look at our other reviews and our English unboxings. Take also a look at our Facebook and Instagram accounts. Have a terrific day and see you next time.